With us on The Full View on SABC News. As we start to wrap up Women's Month, tonight we're looking at abuse that often lurks in dark corridors, sexual harassment in the workplace. Aequitas Consultants has designed a digital app and a website for employers and employees with questions specifically around sexual harassment in the workplace and protections under the law. In a study of 1,000 people, 30% of women, 18% of men reported being victims of unwanted sexual advances at work. Many don't feel like they can approach HR and get the help they need. Let's start with a look at a taste of how this issue can be displayed visually. Well, we are joined now by Fatima Salijee, who is the MD of SGV Attorneys and Aequitas Consultants. Thank you for being with us. Let's start with that video clip. I think it really shows the spiral and the helplessness that often leads to resignations in the first place.
Most certainly. Thank you for having me tonight, Francis. You know, what we experience is that, unfortunately, due to the lack of understanding and a lack of a basic complying with your obligations in terms of the law, it often results in victims of sexual harassment being left isolated and resulting in situations like we saw on that video, with Nandi feeling completely helpless and having no option but to resign under those circumstances.
And the HR women didn't necessarily not want to help, but realized there's no policy in place, which isn't uncommon.
Not at all, Francis. So unfortunately, and based on, you indicated at the beginning that statistically, approximately only 30% of employers actually comply. And when we talk about compliance in terms of the sexual harassment codes, and therefore statutory compliance, step one is having a sexual harassment policy. And therefore, if you don't even get to step one, how are you supposed to do anything further? So if we actually look, we often say that with sexual harassment, unfortunately, you cannot look at the steps individually. It's about a holistic approach to sexual harassment. So employers need to understand that in order to comply, there are a number of duties that you need to comply with. And whilst that...
Tell us about some of those.
It can take me hours. I will try and sum it up in a few minutes. Firstly, a sexual harassment policy. Secondly, training and inducting employees. And that includes training the employees in terms of the definition. What is sexual harassment? One needs to understand sexual harassment doesn't necessarily entail physical contact, and neither does it entail persistence. Part of that training would be training on the policy, on the procedure, as well as behavioral tools in order to give the employees the ability to say no. How do I say no? Then the next thing that you have to do is awareness. So, Francis, it's not about a once-off situation. I train employees, I induct them, and then I forget about it. Awareness means constantly reaffirming the rule within the workplace, saying it's a zero tolerance to sexual harassment. All complainants feel free to come forward, so that you don't have a situation where victims are further victimized. They feel like they have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
They should feel free to go and complain to somebody who will take them seriously.
So it starts with a simple definition. What is sexual harassment? I mean, can we be sympathetic in that some people don't even know they're stepping over the line?
Francis, unfortunately, the situation is such that due to a lack of training, again I say training, people don't understand at times what they may view as a simple proposal, for lack of a better word.
A compliment.
Can remember that sexual harassment is very much a subjective feeling. A simple hug or a simple touch, which you may feel is friendliness, can be viewed subjectively by the victim as sexual harassment. And therefore, setting the tone from the top is critical. Creating an environment that is free of discrimination and free of harassment is critical.
Yeah.
Setting those expectations and telling employees this is unacceptable behavior will set that tone to avoid those kinds of situations.
Why is compliance so low right now?
Again, I think the situation is that people just take it for granted. They feel that I will not be proactive about it. If a situation arises, I will deal with it at that point in time. Whilst employers forget that the repercussions of your failure to comply are so severe. There are financial repercussions, there's reputational repercussions, emotional repercussions, and let's not forget, the victims often then, there are performance issues. So you then have those problems within the workplace. All of this can be avoided if you simply are proactive in the way that you manage sexual harassment in the workplace.
And how bad is it? I mean, you've said not many have policies in place. Beyond that, you do have HR departments, but people don't feel safe to go and approach HR.
Well, unfortunately, HR themselves, and that's a further step. When I was dealing with the duties, I actually had not completed it. I'm actually only a third of the way. So the point is that you then need to train your HR managers and your management. Now, that is not the induction type of training that I was speaking here about. It is more in-depth training. It's about giving them the tools to be able to deal with complaints. How do I deal with this? How do I advise? How do I assist? How do I counsel an employee? How do I go about doing these things? So in our view, having generalists within HR is simply not good enough any longer. You need to have dedicated sexual harassment experts within the workplace.
At what size company? I mean, that could be expensive, but surely once you've got enough employees, you need that sort of skill.
Most certainly. Within corporate entities, it most certainly is required because you don't have that level of control any longer.
Aequitas so is offering this app. Just tell me who can use the app, who can use the website. Why did you develop it?
Okay, so Aequitas is actually it's a consulting business that we created. Within the legal field, we found that sexual harassment is such a unique area of the law. I mean, there's an entire code of good practice dedicated to sexual harassment, that we felt that we needed to dedicate a specific consulting firm with specialists that is dealing specifically with workplace discrimination, harassment, and sexual harassment in the workplace. And over and above that, we have created the first of its kind in South Africa, an e-learning platform on sexual harassment. That means basically complying with your statutory obligations of training by simply clicking, going through PayPal, and complying just by doing the e-learning on sexual harassment.
So it's something that teams can do together.
Most certainly.
Employers and employees can inform themselves. Is this paid for?
Yes, by the employer. The employer, of course, would have to fund it for employees within the workplace. Generally training can be very expensive. So if you think about an entity with 1,000 employees, for example, if you now have to go through a one-day course, it can be very costly, whereas this e-learning course is about 20 to 30 minutes at a relatively low fee.
Yeah, and what sort of take-up are you seeing? Is it too early to tell?
It is brand new, Francis. We've just gone live this morning.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there practical advice there? I mean, say you are a victim or you feel like you're a victim of sexual harassment. Should you confront your harasser? Should you go straight to HR? Those sort of practical things?
Firstly, if you are obviously aware of the sexual harassment policy and it has been effectively communicated, you should follow the procedure that is contained in that policy. You should report in terms of that policy, and immediately once you report, the employer's obligations in terms of consulting, advising, all kicks in. And those obligations in terms of dealing with that complaint kick in.
Yeah, and if you have no idea, any advice for somebody who's sitting grappling with this right now?
Call us. Call us and we'll help you.
All right, thank you very much. That was Fatima Salijee, the MD of SGV Attorneys and Aequitas Consultants, dealing specifically with a lack of knowledge around the law, around those codes, around sexual harassment.